Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Appreciate everybody's patience. I'm impressed that Ryan still wanted me to talk after what everybody's been through today, so I will not be offended if you fall asleep if anyone goes out on that hike. I guess there's not a clicker or anything, is there? So my name is Paul Crump. I am a herpetologist in the non-game and rare species program at Texas Parks and Wildlife. I work on a team of like 8 or 9 biologists. Each of us focus on different taxonomic groups. You know, we have an ornithologist, we have a couple of plant people, we have one sort of general mammologist, and we have a bat biologist. We're just kind of a team of folks that work on rare and endangered species. We have a. I'm going to talk about. So, what's that?
Let me click for you.
That's all right. Keep me moving around.
Yeah.
Very kind of you. We have a kind of a. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. We have a bit of a guiding light in terms of our sort of a strategic plan, what we work on. My position isn't really a general like herpetologist position. I have to focus on the rare species that we've included on what we call our species of greatest conservation need list. It's a classic government like overuse of acronyms thing. The feds make us develop the Texas Conservation Action Plan, which we have to keep up to date every 10 years. And as part of that list, among other things, we have to designate species that we think are at, it's a relative thing. It's not species of conservation concern. It's the species of greatest conservation needs. So it's not like all species. It's the ones that are, that require the most immediate threats. We've got about 1,100 species on our SGCN list. It was updated in 2023. You can skim a lot of the details here, but what you can focus on here is that we have about 64 of the, I think there's more herps than 240, but 64 species that are on our species of greatest conservation need list. Okay, so those are the species that I focus on primarily. As an aside, herps make up as a percentage, they're about a third in terms of the percentage of the species that are on the list. So think of that as like the third most endangered group out of those taxonomic groups behind mammals and fish. And mammals really rank up highly because they have like 35-ish species of bat, I think, and almost all of those are species of greatest conservation need for, well, a variety of reasons, white nose syndrome being the main one. Of the species that we focus on primarily, this is the breakdown. You can see the numbers really jump out for salamanders and turtles. We have a higher proportion of our salamanders and turtles are SGCNs. The salamanders are probably not a surprise for people who pay attention to the ever-changing situation with the spring Eurycia in the state. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. And of course we have a lot of turtles that are really threatened by a bunch of different things, primarily over-collection due to their life history. 19 of those SGCNs are endemics. So these are, when I think about like the highest priority species within this high priority bin, the endemics are really the things that I think I should be focused on, right? We should be focused on, we can't have a, leave it to Mexico conservation strategy for our endemics. Those are the ones that we should be worried about. I thought it would be fun if we could play a little game. So what's the endemic frog?
Eastern toad.
Boom. I already said the Eurycia. Maybe there's 12 endemic Eurycia, maybe there's 15, maybe there's 3. We can debate that. We don't have any endemic lizards, is that correct? Oh, SGCN lizards. Sorry, you guys don't know what the SGCN list is, so that's not a fair thing. But I think of all the rare lizards we have, I don't think. It's not endemic. It occurs in New Mexico as well. So yeah, I don't think any of our. So what about the 4 endemic snakes that are a species of conservation concern?
Texas scarlet.
Yep.
The water snakes.
Yeah, Haarai and Balsa maculata. They can't be twice on here because they're endemic. And then, so what's the 4th? I don't know if it's technically really is endemic or not.
Cuculata.
Yes, exactly. Is it endemic?
Probably not, but there hasn't been any records in Mexico.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then turtles. What are the 2 endemic turtles that are probably on our SGCN list?
Kegels and Texas map turtles.
Man, it's supposed to be harder. Jeez. We get, so I just, for the sake of, I'm going to talk about some programmatic stuff first, just to set the scene, and I'm going to go into a couple of different projects. Funding's a hot button issue right now. We get about $2 million a year for non-game species to play with. And that funds all of our conservation and research initiatives. A lot of the biologists at Forest and Wildlife used to be funded using federal funding that work on non-game species, but most of us are now on state funding. Some of the mammal and bird folks still operate on federal funding, but as we'll talk about in a second here, the mammals and birds get access to a lot more federal funding than certainly the herbs do. So the two main programs that the feds give us money for are the Cooperative Endangered Species Program, which we get about $600 grand a year, and then we get about $1.2 million from the State Wildlife Grant Program. The State Wildlife Grant Program is the one that's linked to that plan I mentioned, the Texas Conservation Action Plan, that we have to keep updated in order to be eligible to receive that money. Despite some concern about whether we were going to get State Wildlife Grant funding this year, we got our full allocation last week. So, pleasant turn of events. We don't know about Section 6 funding this year. So, there's a very small amount of state funding that gets put into the program too, from the sale of conservation license plates. So thank you to all those who purchase license plates. But it's all over the place. The amount of money we get in a given year, I put some numbers down there. As you can see, it's hard to predict what we'll get access to, and thus it's kind of hard to build a program around sort of a roller coaster level of funding. But in total, we get about $2 million per year to work on, somewhere around 900 species. It's a ridiculously small amount of money. It's terrible when you figure out what it is per species. It's embarrassing. And it is, it's not enough to do anything significant with, which is why we spend so much time prioritizing. We spend so much time worrying about the thing we should be doing the most, instead of kind of scattershotting on the different things that may or may not be as urgent. And I throw this up as a comparison. Both Dingle Johnson and Pittman Robertson provide somewhere around $80 million from hunting revenue, excise taxes on ammunition, boat fuel, all that stuff. That comes back to Parks and Wildlife, is matched with fishing licenses, hunting licenses, and so we end up with about $50 million in the wildlife division from the feds that funds most of the programs that exist in the department, in the division. So like all the county biologists that we have that provide technical guidance for landowners, most of that funding comes from Pittman Robertson. And non-game mammals and birds, including bats, are eligible to get that money, so they can tap into that funding every now and again when the administrators of the program are gracious enough to provide access to that. So herps do not get access to that. We are stuck in the knife fight with the plant people and the invertebrate people, and who else is there? I guess that's it for the other funding. So just to give you a bit of a sense of how this stuff is funded. You know what? I'm not going to bore you with that one. The other thing we do is once we've got our species that we're trying to work on, we put them in bins. And essentially, we've got a bin that says, we think this species might be in trouble, but we really don't have enough data to know whether that's true or not. We've got that we know the species is in trouble bin, but we don't have a clue what we need to do. And then there's we know the species is in trouble, we know what we need to do, we just have to get on with stuff. So those are the data deficient, science needs, and then conservation needs bins. All right? Those are the kind of generally programmatically the things we focus on. I'm going to start with an example of a data deficient species here. So I made a reference to the hill country salamanders. Everybody's probably familiar that we have somewhere, I think the current best estimate of how many species we have are I think it's 12 described and maybe another 3 or 4 undescribed. And so the Texas salamander and the Cascade Cavern salamander were both petitioned for federal listing, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. And in 2015, the Fish and Wildlife Service settled a big lawsuit with some environmental groups to review all of the species that they hadn't gotten around to reviewing lately. And the Texas salamander and the Cascade Cavern salamander were on that list. There had been a paper that I'm going to talk about in a second that came out in 2019 that included 2 sites of the Texas salamander in their analysis of sort of Eurisia phylogenetics. So the Fish and Wildlife Service's interpretation of that paper was that there are only 2 sites where the Texas salamander occurs, which is, I'll say this into the camera, which was silly. So we thought, me and a guy, Fish and Wildlife Service I was working with, thought that was really not a very good interpretation of the available science. And if you only have 2 populations of something that occurs on the edge of San Antonio, you can predict that the decision is going to be, things are going to get listed, things look pretty bad for the species. But we know there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other populations out there that weren't included in the analysis, and thus kind of ignored from a decision-making framework. So we set about, we started working with Chris Nice at Texas State University, and we set about trying to collect as many salamander, find as many salamander populations as possible, and collect as many tails as possible for a big kind of. Basically, we were less interested in the phylogenetics of it all. We were more interested in population delineations and understanding where gene flow was occurring and all these other things. So this was the paper in 2019. This was the Devitt et al. Paper and the proceedings at the National Academy of Sciences. Really, really nice piece of work. But a phylogenetics study where they sampled small numbers of individuals across a large geographic area, right? So you're looking at 1 or 2 individuals from in Bexar County, and a couple of individuals from up in here, and they based their recommendations for a taxonomy on a limited number of individuals. We just published a paper at the beginning of this year where we collected something like, I think it was like 900, I can't remember exactly, but we collected about 900 samples at a really high resolution from across this geographic area. What have we got? We've got Hayes, Kendall, Kamal, Bear, Medina, Bandera, and then Kerr counties. And we largely focused on fernbank salamanders, Pterophila. We collected the crap out of anything we could get, whether we thought it might be Neotenes or Latitans, to try and understand what was going on there. And this is essentially a map of the genetic relationships of all those populations that we found. This is Government Canyon right here. And then we've got, I don't remember what the names of these sites are, but this is, I think this would be Guadalupe River State Park. I think, Hill Country State National Area is on here. Anyway, these are some of the.
That's the bottom left one.
You think that is Hill Country?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And then we got, this is San Marcos, this is Conal. Anyway, so Chris took a population genetics approach to it to figure out, not looking at trees, he's looking at admixture and where there's gene flow and all that, and he created these pie charts based on kind of shared alleles within and among populations. So what you can see, we've got really interesting patterns here going on. You can see this cluster, you can see a lot, the orange pieces of the pie here are shared alleles among all these populations. When you overlay this over what people think is going on with the water, this kind of mimics what people think are happening with some of these flow paths, where allegedly the aquifer is kind of moving in this, this direction, but there's a lot of kind of segmentation going on. Our recommendation based on, and this wasn't like a taxonomic assessment to sink or support the current framework, but with the amount of gene flow we found going on in this landscape, there's no way that the existing taxonomy, which is like 3 species in this area, this data doesn't match that framework. There's gene flow happening in the aquifer today between Government Canyon, and there's connectivity with those other populations up in northern Bexar County, but then there's connectivity to Cascade Caverns, out to out to these populations out in western Kendall County, connectivity to Guadalupe River State Park. There's so much going on underground here that we just don't have a clue is actually happening. Who knows whether this is like adult salamanders swimming through big fissures, or a larvae getting shot out once every 20 years. We just have no clue what's actually going on. But the fact that there's this level of shared genetic material across this landscape means there's a lot more connectivity than we previously thought. So it's quite exciting. The recommendation from this was to not treat these, we couldn't, it was inconsistent, I forget how we worded it exactly, but it was like, our results are inconsistent with the existing taxonomy, and perhaps they should be treated like management units, you know? Because there's definitely some patterns there. You can see some unique, there's like barriers to gene flow in some areas more so than others. So this was a lot of fun, and the feds are using this for their updated analysis. Got no clue, you know, what they're going to recommend based on what's going on, but I feel like we succeeded in that. We challenged the idea that there were just two populations of Texas salamander. There's a lot more out there than we'd originally thought. Okay, moving on to a science needs example. So a lot of what I work on in our program, in addition to these SGCNs and the endemics I work on, are species that have been petitioned for federal listing. It's a important goal for Texas to maintain state control over our wildlife resources. So if there's a way to provide information or do conservation programs proactively for things that for species that the Fish and Wildlife Service is interested in taking over management of because they think we've done a poor job of, we want to try and do things proactively, and I need to retain state management. Does that make sense? So they'd be surprised to hear that. Texas doesn't want the feds coming in and telling it what to do. Right? So the chicken turtle was another species that was petitioned for federal listing probably longer ago, but it got caught up in that large package of listing decisions. So we've partnered a lot with Texas A&M. Texas A&M is really the lead. Parks and Wildlife has kind of collaborated with them on a few different projects. And we funded now, I think, 4 different state wildlife grant projects on the species, covering movement, home range, demographic work, habitat selection. We just wrapped up a really cool genetic study looking at gene flow of this species across the landscape. And just recently, the Fish and Wildlife Service's assessment said that they were worried about recruitment in chicken turtle populations. We find all these populations where we get pictures of adults, we find an adult crossing a road, whatever, but we don't know what recruitment is like in those populations. We don't have any evidence of reproduction. And so we've set out this year to use some artificial basket structures for cameras, which I'll show a picture of here in a second, see if we can get our eyeballs or pictures of juveniles of some of these sites. If we can demonstrate that there's like variation in some age structure to the populations, then maybe we can make an assumption that there's some there's reproduction, there's some sustainability. It's kind of hand wavy, but so that's what we've been working on this year. And has anybody ever seen a chicken turtle? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Jeremy.
Not in Texas.
Yeah. They're really hard to find. They're did you yours in Texas?
No.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I should have said
Yeah.
that.
No. That's good. No, I think that exemplifies it. They're a real pain to find. A&M's first study they did on this species from 2015, 16, and 17. They scoured the state, did tons of road cruising, tons of binocular surveys of ponds, and they found like 2 turtles. One of them was over on the Katy Prairie, west of Houston.
Wow.
And so that was the biggest lead we had to go on to try to understand the species. So Brandon Bowers, who I'm sure some of you probably know, really drilled in at the Katy Prairie on what these turtles was doing. He figured out how to catch them, figured out when to catch them, all these different stuff. He kind of pulled together a lot of the studies that were going on in different parts of the range and applied them here, and really kind of blew the lid off of our knowledge base for this species in Texas. But it's a really, really attractive turtle that's been struggling. Now, this is a site. This is a really cool story. We did a training for Parks and Wildlife staff up at the Katy Prairie, and it was like spring of 2018. We invited all the district biologists that work in the counties in that area to Katy Prairie. Brandon had set some traps out the previous night, and he had some telemeter turtles out, so we did like a show and tell. We got to slog through the wetlands and go see some stuff. The following year, one of the biologists who attended that meeting, who works in Warren County, found a dead on the road chicken turtle down by Alcampa. And he knew what it was because he was on his radar. So he collected it, called Brandon. we figured out like, that wetland over this property looks good, and so this biologist, when I knocked on the door, didn't know, and said, hey, we just found this turtle dead on the road outside your house. You mind if we look for these turtles on your pond? He's like, yeah, whatever. Chicken turtle, are you making that up? What is this? And so they set out these basking structures. I don't know. I'll show you this picture here in a second. And this is one of the ponds where they set them out. So they put the basking structures out. A couple of turtles, got up on the basking log. They were like, oh yeah, there's turtles here for sure. So the following year, we went down and set up some traps. And this was this was the trapping setup we used. We used these unbaited fight nets, kind of like drift fences between two hoop nets. They're unbaited. The chicken turtles chase around aquatic invertebrates. They don't go to cans of tuna or sardines here. So there's 4 of these arrays you can see straddled through this pond. We caught 60 chicken turtles in 3 days in this pond.
Wow.
Incredible. So just from like one dead on the road to the guy knocking on the door, and this is probably the second or third highest density site we found in the state so far, which is really cool. But yeah, I just love that, because often I do a lot of training for our colleagues, and most of the time it doesn't really go anywhere. It's kind of like a fun day out for people. But this really worked out well. And this is a really nice example of the habitat they like. This is probably a foot deep, maybe 18 inches deep throughout the whole thing. It's very shallow. Tons of aquatic vegetation, loads of hiding space and food for dragonfly larvae, crayfish, all the aquatic invertebrates that chicken turtles feed on. You can see the Cispania in there too, all the rattlebush coming up. So that probably dried down at some point in the year. Maybe even was dry for most of the last year, and reflooded again, which is ideal for them.
Sorry, what do they do as a chicken turtle?
Oh yeah. So when they leave the wetland and burrow up in the prairie. So most of these sites in Texas, at least, are kind of grassland sites. They're not really heavily forested sites. So when things dry up, they disappear. They burrow down in the dirt. Just maybe like an inch or so below the surface. Hang out there. Some of the populations in the eastern part of the country, they documented them skipping, coming to wetlands the next year to eat and feed. So they can totally, if the rains don't come, they'll skip the season. I'm sure there's a survivorship cost of that, but it's pretty wild. They act like a frog to some degree, right? They come to the ponds in the late winter, early spring. The site of Wharton County, actually, we trapped for 4 days, 3 nights. And the first night we got 10, 12 turtles. The next night it was clear. We got a bit of rain, and it was clear that had triggered more turtles to come from their upland refugia into the ponds. They were all really stained. They looked really kind of like they'd been in the dirt for a long time, and they were starting to shed their scutes and all that. So I think we got lucky with the timing on that. So yeah, they come late winter, early spring. They hang out, they feed. The people who've kept them in captivity say they don't think they can eat on land. They have like a suction feeding kind of methodology, and maybe that's what the long neck's all about, to chase down predators. So they probably gorge on aquatic invertebrates, mate in the water, and then take off and hunker down in the dirt for the rest of the year. Pretty interesting for a turtle. Anyway, so it turns out, as a completely happy accident, Ducks Unlimited has been running around building chicken turtle ponds for the last 20 years. Who would have thought that, right? The waterfowl cells that the Prairie Wetlands Project creates for waterfowl habitat on the coast is perfect chicken turtle habitat. It's amazing. They build the shallow, heavily vegetated ponds for waterfowl food that dry down later in the summer. It's an amazing example of blind luck and conservation benefits to non-target species.
Has anybody looked at Richland Chambers?
Yes, there's old records from Richland Chambers and from Gus Ingley that people have not been able to. Brandon spent a lot of time there looking around those areas.
It does look like it's the same habitat.
Yeah, it's weird. They do seem to be less common in more like bottomlandy stuff than upland sites. So I don't know if Richland. I get the impression Richland's kind of a
Some of the mid areas,
Yeah.
the water's usually deeper, but they do drain some of those out to control the ponds. So sometimes you're in a pond with drained, and other times it's full. So it seems like there's a big moat around it. But then the middle is fairly shallow. So all the waterfowl and everything come in. A ton of vegetation, it's just, sounded right out.
Yeah. No, they've definitely been seen there historically, just not recently.
So, was there a population decline due to like agricultural land use?
Yeah, I think that they seem to be very tolerant of like ranching, but as I was about to say here, they do not seem to tolerate ground disturbance very much. If you have row crop, these were, we think these injuries, and there's a couple of mortalities here. Some of these turtles are, these two on the right were down in Morton County. This one, you could like see into it, you know, it's crazy. And it was still alive, it's a big feisty female. So they're incredibly resilient to injuries. And it's probably just all about how deep they are, right? And how deep either the plow or the disc is running through the soil. It's, you know, they don't occur in rice fields, row crops, anything like that, but which I think has probably been the bulk of the habitat conversion and loss, that's why they're not as common as they were. And of course, urbanization, they were probably all over Houston historically, right? And all those prairie pothole wetlands that occurred in that part of the world. So they've gone there. It's less certain why, if they've declined in other areas where there's not as much soil disturbance. They definitely seem patchy, but they're also a real pain in the ass to find, and we know how difficult it is to access like all of the sites you want to go survey in Texas because of, you know, the private landowners. So it's probably mainly a soil disturbance. Anyway, so yeah, these were turtles that we found. The two on the right there from Warren, I think the three on the left there were from a combination of Cape Prairie and Alizan Bayou WMA. So the disking during the summer, you know, especially as the wetland dries down, it's a very common practice for waterfowl management to disturb some of the grasses to promote warp growth and you know, open up ground for seeds. So ducks give and they take away, it seems, is the takeover of this. So we don't really know if on like net, if this is if they're providing, it's all beneficial, or if it's, you know, slightly beneficial, or maybe there are some longer term problems that we haven't discovered yet. So this is the artificial basking structure design that Brandon Bowers came up with. And the second I saw this, I was like, I could have totally come up with that. Isn't it genius? It's like two floating logs on some PVC tied to a T-post with a camera on it. It's set to time lapse. It goes one photo every minute from basically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It is super effective at detecting them. They're there, and of course these wetlands are like prairie wetlands. So this is a scrubbier one down at Justin Hurst WMA. But the real nice ponds that they like don't have any basking structure. So the second you put a log in there, they're like the next day they're climbing up on it. Like, yes, finally something to bask on. So we picked them up at maybe a dozen new sites using this technology. It's really, really great. The trapping, you know, it's a ton of work, right? It's all sorts of problems go on with trapping. So trapping is not a good way to scout a site to see if they're there or not. This is a great way to scout. We just set these up this year for the first time out in West Texas for Chihuahuan desert mud turtles in some ponds out in West Texas. We're going to see if we can lure those up to bass at some of these sites. And those desert wetlands are sometimes similar too. There's not a lot of natural basking structure, so yeah, we'll see. And that's what you get when you get lucky. Look at that. What a neck on that thing, isn't that cool? This was from a site down in Chambers County. We were chasing blood samples for that project. So we were this site down there near Anahuac. It's not Anahuac anymore. They renamed it, didn't they? Can you remember what the new name is? I can't remember what it is. But there's like, you know, 200 wetlands out there, and we were trying to figure out which ones the turtles were using. So we did about 5 weeks of trapping, every other week for 5 weeks. But we would set up the cameras 1 week as well. So we did put like a dozen camera arrays out, trap the ponds we knew they were from the previous year, set up the cameras at a bunch of sites, and then process the camera imagery by the following week, and wherever we got chicken turtles on the cameras, we'd move our traps to, so we can trap there and get more information, get more checks. So it was a ton of work, but a really cool project. Okay. I don't know, I didn't really think about how long this was going to take, so it's already nighttime. So at any point you're like, done, Paul.
Keep going.
Keep going. All right. Just tell me that whenever you're ready. Everybody knows what this is. One of our everybody's favorite Texas turtles. This is a picture taken of a one of the largest ones I think that have been found in the state. I don't remember the details on the size, but Stephen at Boston State University ran a really cool project, repeating a study done by some folks in the Forest Service and A&M from the 90s. And long story short, Texas Parks and Wildlife protected this species from commercial and personal take in 1987. And so when it became apparent that the major threats to the species were overcollection, Texas did a pretty good job of trying to shut down the trade. There's still illegal poaching and collection that goes on with the species, which I'll talk about in a second here. But when you compare the work that was done in the late 90s to the work that was done just a few years ago, there's been no net change in the occupancy rate of alligator snapping turtles over that time, and they even caught a few more turtles this time around. We were able to go back to exactly the same sites and retrap. I think it was around 25 sites. They even caught 3 of the same turtles about 20 odd years later. But there's I can't remember the name of the creek. It's one of the creeks east of Dallas. I can't remember what it was, forgive me. It's like a creek between 2 reservoirs on that chain I guess it's the eastern end. In the 90s, they threw out, the approach is to do 15 of these big 4-foot hoop nets spread out about 50 to 100 meters apart down a creek or around a reservoir. And in the 90s at the site, they caught 1 turtle. So they marked him, let him go. In 2021, I think it was, they went back to that exact same site, put the traps back in the same place. They caught 1 turtle, and it was the same turtle. That poor guy's fully alone in that area. I don't know what that's about. It's pretty weird. But I think he'd grown like a centimeter in 20 years. That's wild. One of the other turtles had doubled in size as it was a bit smaller. Another one had grown a little bit. One of them they caught, they think, up at Caddo Lake. I don't know if you know Goose Prairie up on Caddo Lake. Just a big kind of flat wetland. They put the trap, they think they put the trap in like, a couple of meters from where the trap was before. They got the same turtle in the same trap. Like, hadn't moved in 20, who knows what it had done between in that 20 years. Maybe it had gone to Louisiana and back, but it was in exactly the same place 20 years later. So, but the biggest threat to Texas populations currently is probably incidental capture on passive fishing equipment like trot lines, limb lines, all that kind of stuff that people use to catch fish for catfish and other things, and illegal collection. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here. We had a really interesting case come up. So allegedly, because of the rules in Louisiana where you can take 1 turtle per vessel per day, it sounds like madness, right? You can go at these turtles that hard. The populations are allegedly depleted in parts of that state. So we've been told that Louisiana turtle catchers come to Texas to take our turtles illegally. So from 2012 to 2016, Fish and Wildlife Service and Parks and Wildlife partnered, I guess with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries too, on Operation Snap. The goal was to just put a sort of a law enforcement surge onto this poaching operation that was going on where they were illegally taking turtles out of Texas into Louisiana. The operation was led by a guy named Jim Steinbach, who is a delightfully scary man. He did undercover work for Fish and Wildlife Service in the kind of like wildlife poaching arena, and he's told me some stories about the situations he was in. He is now a uniformed officer working out of East Texas for Fish and Wildlife Service, but phenomenal guy, just really kind of very brave. I'll say that. This project was a huge success, resulted in multiple prosecutions. They busted a really nefarious group of people that were coming in. There's a really cool story in, I think it was Texas Monthly about it. Check it out if you can and read it. It involves, brothers double-crossing each other, the patriarch of a family either committing suicide or getting murdered. It's off the rails. It's just really crazy. Anyway, so as part of this case, we about 35 turtles were confiscated from poachers in Louisiana. They were held at the Natchitoches National Fish Hatchery originally Louisiana was looking to develop a captive propagation program where they could use offspring to replenish some of the populations that they lost. But Louisiana didn't want to participate in that, and so Fish and Wildlife started breeding them. And I started in Parks and Wildlife in 2018, so this case had kind of been going on in the background. I didn't really know a lot about it. I heard people were telling me when I started, the feds have got our turtles, we want them back. I was like, whatever, that sounds weird. But I think it was the end of 2019, the guy who was running the hatchery, Brett Mortman at the time, called me up. He said, hey, we've got these turtles. We've got these baby turtles for you. Where do you want them? I was like, what? So these guys have been breeding our turtles, thinking that we wanted them back for a propagation and release program. And at the same time, we're planning. We've been doing all this work on stats of the species in the state. And you know how it is. Captive propagation is obviously a really good tool if you have a part of the range that's empty and you want to supplement or recover a population. But we had no evidence that this was even necessary, really, for alligator snapper turtles in Texas. So we ended up squabbling with them a little bit about what was going to happen. Eventually, we decided we want the adults back, and we're going to do our best to figure out where they came from, and we're going to put them back where they came from. That felt like the right thing to do. So did a bunch of really cool stuff. Oh yeah, there's that. Actually. So one of the neatest things we were able to do was get a ton of genetic samples from across the range and essentially develop a genetic map, a population assignment test, where we could figure out where these turtles came from based off of turtles of known origin. We worked with Tangled Bank Conservation, a guy named JJ Apodaca, the guys from SFA who've been running across the range collecting tons of turtle blood samples, and then Turtle Survival Alliance provided a ton of data. This is just a PCA graph showing the kind of partition of some of the Texas populations. Long story short, there's a ton of variation across the range in alligator snapping turtles. If alligator snapping turtle, if we use the same rules for genetic differences that we use for hill country salamanders on alligator snapping turtles, we'd have like 30 species of alligator snapping turtle. They're like the Natchez is completely different than the Sabine. The Sabine is super different than the red, the sulfur, the Trinity. They're just very, very different. And I think it's because these turtles just do not move over land, right? There's just no gene flow kind of among the drainages. So the only way to get an individual to go from one population to another is to get out into the Gulf, go around, come back in. There's less of a difference between the Natchez and the Sabine because they're like kind of not all that far apart. And then I think the Trinity and Buffalo Bayou San Jacinto populations were kind of similar, but not similar, very different, but less very different than the other ones, because the mags are a little bit closer. So there might be some, every now and again, somebody makes it through. So this is really helpful. Having this level of population structure is a really good thing. It enables us to figure out where these things are from. And for future law enforcement cases, we know if somebody in Louisiana says, oh, I got all these from Texas, it's like, take some blood, run the sample. You're like, look, those are Trinity River turtles. You stole those from Texas. Really great resource. So anyway, we figured out where these turtles were from, figured out where we wanted to put them. We did a ton of sort of pre-release survey work. We knew we couldn't put these turtles back into areas with really high densities of other alligator snapping turtles. They're quite aggressive. That would be a kind of a messy deal. So we tracked a ton of sites to figure out where there were some turtles, there was good habitat, but maybe not, overflowing. And in, I guess it was June of 21, we did this really cool thing. We went to Natchitoches, a ton of us went to Natchitoches, worked up these turtles, put telemeters on everybody, and then like some kind of conservation ninjas, through the middle of the night we drove through, we drove from Louisiana into Texas to the sites. We got there like at dawn, and we're out on boats, putting these turtles back out as the sun was coming up. It was a really fun operation. And I'm not a big fan of putting pictures of myself in presentations, but this is one of the coolest things I've ever done. This is a lot of fun. To put turtles that were destined for the dinner table back into the wild was very satisfying. Unfortunately, during the post-release monitoring phase, things did not go particularly well. About 30 turtles went back out, about 10 at 3 different sites in the Natchez, the Sabine, and in the Sulphur. And we had a ton of folks helping and both contributing labor and manpower to tracking these guys. We tracked them for about 3 years. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think it ended last year. So we tracked them for about 3 years post-release. All of them either disappeared or died. the sad part about it is they were like, we have a lot of turtles still in our waterways, and of course the idea that we could find the home range where these things came from originally is absurd, right? We're never going to get into that level of detail. We picked the best sites we could. There's still quite a few turtles in the water. We think that they spent the first year, there was no mortalities in the first year. So the first year we were kind of like, yay, sounds like things are going well. What we think they were doing is they were moving around a lot. They were making much larger movements than they would normally. And I should have added, we tagged at each site, we tagged 10 resident turtles too, so we could compare survivorship and movement and all that stuff. So the resident turtles, 99.9% survival, little movements punctuated with some seasonal weirdness, but usually coming back to a core home range. Our guys were making like 10, sometimes 20-mile trips up and down the river, just really kind of fumbling around, like clearly not finding a good place. And whether they were running into the turtles and getting scared off, we don't know. We had one of the turtles was just a gigantic male who was put back into the Sabine. He was found dead a week after he was released by looked like bite marks from another big alligator stuff. So I think that was the only mortality that we had during that first year. Then once the first year ended, lots of turtles disappeared. We found parks of some turtles. A lot of them had mortality signals on the bottom of the creek that we just couldn't get to. So yeah, kind of sad. Really good lesson though, right, about how to handle these cases. Like once you take them out of the water and you hold them in captivity for too long, the probability of successfully putting them back is pretty low, pretty scary. Which means we've got to do our best either to get them back quickly before either they get acclimated or whatever. And with the impending listing for this species too, there's a lot of fuss about development projects, whether it's TxDOT putting in a new bridge or Harris County Flood Control wanting to straighten a part of the bayou. People are talking about they want to move these turtles. Like, we got this stretch of river has 10 turtles or something. Well, what do you do with them? Where do you put them? If you can shift them down the road, you're going to probably kill them just by putting them in the home ranges of other turtles. It's a weird problem to have where we've probably got enough of a species not to worry about it, but there's lots of projects happening where you want to do something with it. Interestingly, you've probably heard this. We now know about 5 or 6 that are in the San Marcos River. The folks at the Meadow Center that do the aquatic vegetation removal and all the spear fishing, tilapia, and all that stuff. Seen
Yeah, apparently there's one stuck. I think it's stuck under the grate at City Park where where the cement is that you jump in the river from, right there by Lions Club. Christopher was saying that there's one, like if you're swimming along that, there's a little grate there, and there's an alligator snapper stuck in there. I think it's stuck, and it's been there for like 2 years.
Jesus.
So we need to find like an underwater welder or somebody that can release it. I know they'd have to put the grate back just for safety
But get it out.
purposes, but yeah, I just found out about it last week.
Chris had mentioned that. I thought he said he was going to talk to somebody about that. I guess maybe he hadn't found a solution to it.
Yeah.
Probably made somebody to pay him underwater welder to.
Well, I just feel like we could find somebody that would do that,
Yeah.
like for free,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anybody knows the underwater welder?
Yeah, we got business. we can pay good money. So, that's San Marcos River is outside of the natural range of the species, and so San Marcos River is an ecologically interesting place already with all the different species from around the world already in it. So we pulled one of these turtles. We pulled out. I think it was like 2021 or 22. And we genotyped it. It matched populations from southern Arkansas and northern Louisiana, which I guess is where all the turtle farms are, where they breed them, where they probably collected the brood stock for breeding. So it's probably a captive, one that was held in captivity to about a certain size, and somebody dumped it in the river. And now there's 5 or 6 of them in there doing their thing. It doesn't give me too much heartburn. It would suck if somebody got their toes nibbled on by one. They've been in there for so long. I think the probability of that happening is pretty low.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Until somebody makes me deal with that, I'm gonna let that ride out. Maybe if we find any more, maybe we'll just add them to the population. Seems like pretty good habitat. Maybe we can create like a waif population of turtles out there. They do that with gopher tortoises, right? And out east, where they have sites where they're outside of the core range, where they take all their other ones. So yeah, so it's kind of a sad story, but you know, we learned a lot. We really learned that you just can't do this. You know, we don't. And a one study is not enough to say we're never going to reintroduce or translocate these turtles, but we're not going to make exactly the same mistake twice. You know, we're not going to take turtles that were held in captivity for 5 years and go do this. So yeah, we got a lot to learn about this. Okay, the last project I'm going to talk about is, of course, Houston toads. Anybody knows me, this is going to probably come up at some point. This is an example of one of those species that that there's been like lots of research done on it. We have a clear path forward of what needs to be done recovery-wise. We've had traditional challenges, kind of staying focused and getting on with it, but the time is now where, with sort of the strategic use of available resources, if we're ever going to make headway with the species, then now's the time before you know, the remaining range gets chopped up into even more smaller parcels, and things just become really untenable to do any of the things that need to be done to manage that habitat. There's a lot of really cool things going on with this species right now. I'll talk about the habitat restoration initiatives we've got going on in a second. A lot of renewed interest in acquisitions and easements on private lands and expanding Bastrop State Park to provide more habitat. We've been working on a ton of private landowner engagements, a lot of really cool research that's put us in a great place to just barrel forward with stuff. Loads of monitoring going on, and probably one of the coolest parts of this is the cattle propagation and release program that's been happening over the last sort of, well, probably nearly 20 years now. Just some kind of context about what's happening in y'all are probably familiar with the 2011 wildfire that happened in the county there. This is some habitat suitability modeling that was done by a consultant company that we hired to assess the impacts of the wildfire on the toad in Bastrop State Park specifically. So this shows some sort of pre and post stuff here. Griffith League Scout Ranch is the primary recovery site for the species right now, where most of the research and cattle propagation work has occurred. We're moving to do some releases in Bastrop State Park in 2026. So the picture on the left shows, you know, the available, essentially high quality habitat across the burn scar area the year before the fire, and then the year after the fire on the right hand side. Bastrop State Park lost 98% of the suitable Houston toad habitat in the park. Now we can debate endlessly what suitable Houston toad habitat actually is, but our sort of conventional dogmatic understanding of what that is, this includes you know, sandy soils, canopy cover, and some kind of maturity for the stand. And so it's not a surprise that subsequent to the fire, the toad blinked out in the state park. I should go back. We had, for the first time since records on the toad began, 2016 was the first year where no Houston toads were found or heard in the state park that year. There have been some small attempts, kind of 1 year reintroduction efforts with limited numbers of eggs to try to put the toad back on some level, and that twice has resulted in kind of a limited and short duration rebound in the population as a result of that reintroduction, but it didn't stick. It's usually 1 or 2 years and then it goes back to no toads again. Our current understanding of Houston toads is that they probably exist as, you know, really extreme like metapopulation dynamics where they're exchanging a lot of individuals across the landscape. Again, you can argue with the available science on that, but that's what we're currently thinking that this is not a species that, you know, it's got a pond, breeds in a pond, all the individuals come back to that pond every year, and if you can save one pond, you've saved the species kind of thing. We think that it needs a larger spatial scale than that. So connectivity between Griffith League Ranch and Bastrop State Park moving forward is going to be really important if we're to sustain the populations, and this is probably this area here between Bastrop State Park and Griffith League Ranch includes Highway 21 and loads of small acreage lots with hundreds of landowners that all have different management goals and different value sets. It's going to be really hard to sort of stitch that landscape back together after it's burned. One take on it is that as long as the burned areas aren't kind of converted into non-native grass pastures and really hammered really hard, it's probably not the worst thing in the world for the native grasses and the prairies to recover after, and then eventually some trees fill in, and we might have, crazily enough, in a really horrible shortcut to getting back to the savanna landscape that may have occurred there before the high density pine and really high fuel loads were allowed to build up over the last 100 years, which led to the fire, right? So you all know the Houston toad's life cycle: eggs, tadpoles, toadlets. I wanted to show this graph. This is a really interesting plot from the primary recovery site. I think it shows at least the power in the short term of the captive propagation colony, and why, if we can upscale and implement the habitat restoration methods that we need to occur at a larger spatial scale, I think we can turn the tide on this. So this plot shows basically the last 25 years of Houston toad counts on the Griffith League grant. Saunders, I'm sure you're responsible for some of those numbers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you can see the fire. This 2011 was the fire. 2007 was when we brought toads into captivity for the first time. So it was these numbers hovering around 100 that we were kind of alarmed by in the early 2000s. Brought toads into captivity in 2007. Started doing head starting, like really small releases of metamorphs and tadpoles and some adults and things. We don't think things really went that well. It was around 20. I think it was 2015 or 16 when the zoos made the switch over to releasing eggs, and then started to really ramp up their ability to breed toads in captivity, produce just a crap ton of eggs. I think at the last count, they're doing releases right now, or this season. I think at the last count they're up to like 2 or 3 million eggs, I think, per year.
We're putting a lot of eggs in these ponds.
Yeah.
Constantly.
And there's a lot of debate about whether that's too many, whether we should be spread them around. There's a lot of things that we don't know exactly how to optimize on this. But what you really can't argue with, at least in the short term, is there's more toads on the Griffith League Ranch now as a result of that than there was in the past. The fact that the captive propagation numbers have put the toad number, I think the 2004 numbers were pretty similar to the last numbers on that, if I remember rightly. So we're talking about 700 toads on it, compared to when we were in free count mode, kind of 100 back 20 years ago, which is pretty remarkable. Now, whether this is going to be successful long term, we're going to conduct that experiment here pretty soon. We're going to pivot from releases on the Griffith League Ranch to some other sites, and then we're going to watch the Griffith League Ranch, right, and see what happens to the toad population on it. Has the habitat management that's been done been sufficient to kind of turn the tide and make the system more productive? This is the test of that, right? I think lots of us are skeptical about whether that's sufficient or not. Anyway, with all the work that's being done at the Griffith League Ranch, Western State Park, there's a whole, another 8 counties where that used to have Houston toad populations, up until very recently, that we've been focused on, and pointing out, I did this in the last time. Zach's here. Zach's my collaborator on the Houston toad initiatives. We do work in Bastrop State Park, but we try to focus. Bastrop County, but we try to focus elsewhere. A lot of the landowners in the other counties have traditionally received less attention. A lot of the parcels, a lot of the properties in those other counties tend to be larger. They're less urban. There's less barriers to do things like prescribe fire. So there's a lot more kind of opportunities for bigger scale stuff outside of those counties. And this is the recovery units that the Fish and Wildlife Service has designated in the last recovery plan. The little red boxes there, the kind of weirdly shaped ones. In order for Houston toads to be removed from the endangered species list, it requires 75,000 acres. Is that right? Yes, right. Yeah, 75. That sounded really large when I said it, and that's why, because it's crazy. 75,000 acres of habitat to be permanently protected. About 15,000 acres in each of these recovery units. So a very large number. Seems there are some other numbers associated with that, like we need 5,000. No, it might be 1,000 females, I think, they want to see on average over a 5-year period within a recovery unit in order to meet that like recovery metric. So a lot of really lofty goals that need to be done with that. When we're never going to get there, right? We don't have access to, up until the last couple of years, we never really had any good collaborators in any of these other counties outside of Bastard. So we've been really hammering it the last 3-4 years to try and break into these communities to at least make them aware of the toad, collaborate with the local biologists, other partners on things that might be more important to landowners than toads. It's a room full of herpers here, so somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hey, we got a Houston toad program." Of course, we're all in, right? But most people don't have that same predilection for bufonids that we do. So we've been working in these communities trying to infiltrate. Is not the right word, but I'll say that. The toad message in amongst the broader wildlife management program that goes on in those areas. You can see, if you look carefully, you can find a toad on each of these flyers that we send out to landowners. We don't want to ignore the toad fully. We just don't want to highlight the endangered species. You know what I mean? When you're trying to draw private landowners to an event where you're going to provide information about cost share programs and habitat restoration, we don't lead with the endangered species. We found that leading with the endangered species results in more questions in public forums than we can adequately deal with in these situations. So it would be like if Coca-Cola's commercials focused on diabetes. Would be it's a strange thing. We've done it. I've done it. For years I gave presentations about the Houston toad. People are like, "What are you going to do if you find a toad on my property?" It's like, well, probably nothing, but I can't say that in front of a room full of 100 people. That's weird, but that's the reality of it. So anyway, we developed these. These are a couple of flyers from the last couple of workshops and field days we did. So we put on events where we pull in landowners, we give them lunch, we try to make it fun, we try to focus on kind of the things they're interested and talk about how the Houston toad management stuff can help them achieve their goals. So it's kind of we've had a lot of success the last couple of years. It's really been a fun program to work on. Just some quick and dirty numbers here. In the last couple of years, we've probably reached somewhere around, I would say around 500 to 600 landowners in these communities. We're going to if we get the money we're hoping to get this year, we're going to upscale that. So we should be probably added potentially double those numbers optimistically in terms of the outreach game. I mentioned the recovery goals of 15,000 acres per recovery unit. It sounded kind of crazy, but at our workshops in 2024, the landowners combined own 15,000 acres. So that's pretty cool. Right? That's kind of an interesting coincidence. So it's not we're reaching large numbers of people, and with a lot of acreage combined, we just now have to figure out how to get them into the program, how to work with them more effectively on these programs. This is my favorite graph here. Since we started dedicating funding in 2021 to Houston toad habitat restoration, we've conducted just under 850 acres of brush management. We will have by the end of this year all of the programs, all the projects we've got designed, all the money we have currently on hand get implemented and go well. We restored about 850 acres of mechanical brush management on, and burned around 1,500 acres. So you can see we're kind of, over the years, we're increasing the acreage we do. We're getting access to more pots of money, more partners. We're just really desperately trying to kind of jam as much resources into the system as we can and provide support for the landowners that we've been working with. And it's been really rewarding. The idea that we could start to begin to turn the tide on this a little bit is really quite something. We got a large grant from the USDA last year, $4 million for Houston toad habitat restoration across the range. We were very excited about that. Unfortunately, it's been frozen during the current kind of review that the feds are doing. We're really hoping we get access to that money. You can see we've spent, 1.3 million over the last 5, but we can spend 4 million over the next 4 years. In addition to adding, there's match money that comes in with that. We can really crank those numbers up and do some really good things. In addition to reintroducing toads in association with some of these restoration projects and putting, spreading the risk around to different counties. I think there's a really positive path forward, but there's a lot of, a lot of headwinds. Okay, that was the last project I want to talk about. I'm kind of done. I just want to plug our Forest and Wildlife has a webinar series that we do. We've rebranded it. Apparently, we got told we needed to get diversity out of our program's name. We were the Wildlife Diversity Program. Now we're the Wildlife Conservation Program. I kind of like that too, though, right? This is what we do, conservation. It's not bad. Yeah. The Wildlife Conservation webinar series, as it's now called, occurs on the third Wednesday of every month. We've got a webinar next Wednesday coming up. Jesse Meek from Charlton University is reporting on the last 4 years of his Cahill's map turtle research. And he's done a killer job on this project. If you're around, we do it at lunchtime from 12 to 1. So if you can make it, please tune in. You can sign up for him at our webinar at our website. We've done 50 webinars over the last couple of years. There's tons of really cool material on there. Like probably 30% of them are HERP webinars. I make all the people that do HERP projects do the webinars. So they're all archived on YouTube. You can go watch them all. There's some really neat stuff on there. And then we try and do them every month. We've probably got, next month it's going to be Alligator Snapper Turtle Project. We've probably got 3 or 4 more this year about various HERP projects that are wrapping up. So I encourage you to check it out. It's a good week. Usually researchers write a paper, give a report, gets in a drawer somewhere, and people move on. We kind of felt like this was a good way to at least provide some, give something back to the public who are obviously funding all this work. Some outreach back to everybody to give some information to the stakeholders. So check it out and get a chance. That was all I wanted to say. So appreciate your time. Sorry if I went on too long. I have no idea how long I talked for. Jesus Christ, that was over an hour and a half. Is that really an hour and a half?
Good for you. Good work.
Okay. That's a long time. It never feels like that when I get told. Are there any questions? Yes. Hi.
So I noticed on there was like at the very end it said umbrella species.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear about maybe what some examples of those would be.
Turkeys, wild turkeys, bobwhite quail. Honestly, white-tailed deer in a lot of circumstances. It vary depending on the system. There's not herps on there. Texas horn lizards would be an umbrella species for herp. There's a lot of landowners that are motivated. They go misty-eyed when they think about horn lizards when they were a kid in the central Texas area. But because they're an SGCN, they don't really fall into that category. So it's really I would think of it as being the kind of culturally and economically important species that landowners tend to get excited about. So yeah, turkey and quail. Turkey being the real main ones for me in the Post Oak Savannah system. We find a lot of landowners are really motivated by creating turkey habitat. Then we got this whole other bin on the other side, which are the assumed stable ones, right? Gulf Coast toads, probably stable. They're committing suicide in fire rings. Probably too many of them, right? They're trying to thin themselves out like lemons. Anyway, thank you for staying awake. I didn't realize I talked that long. I'm sorry. That was.
Thanks for saving the day, honestly.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience.
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure.